So far throughout its long run, the Archie Sonic comics have been many things. Silly and dramatic, frustrating and fun, upsetting and enthralling. For better or worse, the comic never stagnates. No, it constantly morphs and evolves, and eventually that change leads to something that can't even be called Archie Sonic any longer. Now it's called Archie Knuckles. At first, it might not seem like this distinction means that much. After all, Rad Red's early material is quite similar in tone to the Blue Blurs. And this is incredibly clear from just looking at how all these characters interact with each other. I mean, we got Espio, Charmy, Vector, Heavy, Bomb, and Mighty, and they're just goofy. As is usual for the gag era, their first story together is primarily focused on just being fun. Whether it's the colorful and expressive action in this amusement park setting, or the goofy personality of someone like Vector, man, I love this crazy croc and his headbangers that are apparently capable of repelling forest fires by playing Sonic Boom. That guy sure was the one cruising for a bruising, baby. You tell him. Then we get this fight between a giant Knuckles and a massive Mecha Sonic, and yeah, it just has that same charm and snappy personality that I enjoy so much from this early gag era material. However, this isn't just a complete copy of what's going on with Sonic. No, this group has its own dynamic because these characters, they aren't really heroes. Now these guys only joined up because they happened to be around at the time that the Freedom Fighters got into some trouble and they wanted to help out Knuckles, and they're cool dudes. Heck, they don't even see themselves as a team. The Chaotix? I ain't joining no circus. Immediately this makes them this sort of cool alternative to the Freedom Fighters. A bunch of loners who do their own thing, but when trouble comes to their island, they instantly work together and have each other's backs. Along with a plethora of silly one-liners. Like when this mammoth guy shows up and gives a 2-page essay on how he's a big threat who's existed since prehistoric times and is totally powerful or whatever, but then he gets popped in the nose and he's like, whoops, gotta go. I also really like this story where Charmy just happens to see Mighty and convinces him to play tag, with each Chaotix following suit because they all can't stand the thought of being it, regardless of if they were actually playing in the first place. It's adorable, and in this way the comic actually solidifies a believable bond between these characters faster than it did with the Freedom Fighters, I think. However, alongside these kind of stories, there's something else lurking on the floating island, a different tone. At first, it just seems like a story here or there, a moment that makes you pause and go, wait, did Knuckles' dad just walk into a wall of fire and end it all? Because yes, that just kind of happens, which feels very distinct from the gag era, that's for sure. But then these moments grow. They become more common, and eventually it's no longer like a small insect, something you can ignore. No, it's bigger than that. It's a magic insect who's going to kidnap all your friends while they're playing tag and try to teach you some sort of vague lesson about sticking together with your friends and not viewing an objective as more important. As easy as it is to poke fun at the specifics of this story or some of the ways in which it's presented, this question, it's actually at the heart of what quickly makes the Knuckles comic feel so different from its blue counterpart. While the Sonic comic would sometimes touch on serious topics, further interpretation of those things was left up to the reader. It didn't really stop to focus on it all that much. Now we're being direct with the reader and the characters, going, there is a lesson here and you're going to learn it. In this case, that lesson simply begins with the question, what is more important? Your duty to your personal relationships or your duty to your role within society at large? And those are the types of questions that aren't as easy to answer, unlike whether or not you should beat the snot out of an insane dictator named Robotnik. It's the type of question that then begs me to ask my own question, like, what is Archie Knuckles trying to say? What is the point of Archie Knuckles? And if this comic is asking me to take it seriously, by golly, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna try and figure out what this comic wants me to learn. I'm gonna read every issue and every sentence and every word. I'm gonna pass Professor Lowart's class and graduate, baby. By Aurora, I'm gonna do it. It's crunch time, folks, and there's not an ounce of pork in my echidna bod. Whatever that means. So far, I've really enjoyed Knuckles as a character. I love his ridiculous rivalry with Sonic, how his willingness to grow from his mistakes is just as strong as his hot-headedness, along with how sincere he is about protecting his home. I mean, my man was about to fight existence itself if it didn't cut out that being green business, sheesh. So I'm not kidding ya when I say I sure like this echidna, and was super excited to read a comic focused on him and his little adventures on this little island. However, throughout his original miniseries and the first 12 issues of his own spin-off comic, well, there's a lot more going on than you'd probably expect. Mainly, the comic's new desire to focus on the history of the floating island itself and Knuckles' role as its guardian. And boy, oh boy, is there a lot of history. Whether it's the Echidnas first raising their society into the sky to avoid an incoming meteor, the existence of a lineage of guardians, or any multitude of flashbacks we get, this comic is dead set on letting you know all about the past and how it affects Knuckles in the present. For example, there's this little ant dude named Archimedes, who has kidnapped Knuckles' friends in the hopes of teaching him a lesson about the priorities of being a guardian. Why? Well, because the ants and echidnas have a relationship that goes way back. They're actually the only reason the echidnas were able to get this island off the ground in the first place, and they've even helped train previous guardians. Since this is a whole side of his heritage that Knuckles has never heard about, he's suitably surprised and confused, similarly to how the reader would probably feel. However, the past quickly takes on a much more literal form as the echidna Enerjack appears, Knuckles' distant relative Dimitri, who infused himself with the energy of the Chaos Emerald centuries ago and went mad with power. As Knuckles and Archie fight against him, they learn to trust in one another, and ultimately, Enerjack is defeated the same way as before, through the teamwork of the great echidna and the smallest of God's great creatures. Oh boy. But wait, there's more. See, at this point, we've learned that Dimitri, aka Enerjack, gained his awesome power by using tech called the Chaos Siphon. After experiencing Enerjack's frightening power, the echidnas of the past grew wary of technology, and so Dimitri's brother Edmund decided to lead the charge in removing all technology from echidna society. Of course, though, this type of proposal isn't popular with every echidna. I mean, Marta, you gave them the VCR? Things just spiral out of control from here as the echidnas who want to keep their technology don spooky black cloaks and name themselves the Dark Legion. Very non-insane branding, all while being led by none other than Dimitri's son, Menaker, who blames his uncle Edmund for his father's death and intends to enact revenge on society after he believes he gets a sign from his father's grave. Wicked. But my man Edmund won't have it, nor will he have a head as he gets brutally shot. And yeah, wow, okay. So then his son, Steppenwolf, this is Steppenwolf by the way, he's guided by the ants and becomes the first proper guardian of the floating island using a secret, technologically advanced base to spy on every single echidna to make sure they don't use technology or go against the democratic system. Woo! Steppenwolf then confronts the council, who then confronts him with a gun, but oh baby, this guy's on his knees! He needs forgiveness from this kind guardian who knows we can reason with the Dark Legion. Even though they killed his father, Steppenwolf wants to try and do what's right. Godspeed. But the Dark Legion, they won't listen. One of them attacks Steppenwolf, so using his special Guardian Chaos powers, he sends every single echidna from the Dark Legion into the Twilight Zone, where they'll be separated from the rest of echidna society forever. Even Menaker, his own cousin. And you know, I kind of feel like trapping everyone in an alternate reality prison could be a bit overkill and could possibly create an eternal grudge, but this is what you get for wanting to keep your Sega Genesis, folks. Wow. Yeah, that's quite a bit of history there. A dramatic story with its own twists and turns and a surprising amount of characters, and I kinda love it all, like a lot. To quote Knuckles the Echidna, this dope is strictly Looney Tunes. What truly sells this is that the art is great. Like, look! There's a sense of scale to it all. Everyone is so expressive. There's genuinely cool looking action, and yeah, it just looks like someone really tried to make this feel big and proper. And that someone is often Manny Gallen, who handles the vast majority of Knuckles' material, and I love seeing all the little details he adds to the backgrounds that allow these locations to feel alive. Meanwhile, we have this great paneling from Art Moini, where, as the top 2/3 of the page are taken up by the main action, a change of stakes is slowly chronicled over the bottom third of the page. This way, regular conversations can have some tension injected into them, as a villainous force makes its way closer to our heroes, or as something cataclysmic grows in scale. But then there's the covers. With few exceptions, every Knuckles story is a 3-parter, and so in order to sell how special that is, the covers combine to form one massive image that encapsulates the story's progress and core ideas of these arcs. The detail speaks for itself. Every time I look at these sick images, I'm left thinking, man, Archie Knuckles is so freaking cool. And a major part of that is how these spreads sometimes combine the past and present elements of these stories in such epic ways. So cards on the table, I might as well make this clear here. No matter what else I have to say going forward, know that on its own, I adore all this echidna lore. But, of course, all this cool lore isn't on its own. No, it's with Knuckles. Or should I say that Knuckles is with it. For instance, when we learn all this stuff about the past, Knuckles has a run-in with the Dark Legion who've escaped from their separate dimension. Which probably sounds pretty cool after all, we get to learn about this past as Knuckles faces it. Makes sense. Except that Knuckles doesn't do much at all. Like, while we get this fairly complex narrative in the past, the present gives us Knuckles just kind of fighting Dark Legion dudes, I guess. I'm honestly struggling to describe it because not much happens here. It's basically just Knuckles asking who the heck all these guys are, beating them up a bit, and that's that. At the end, Knuckles doesn't even get to defeat the Dark Legion's leader, Kragok. Nah, this guy just runs away after a mostly uninvolved character saves Knuckles and the Chaotix from getting blasted, which is exactly what happened in the last story. And so at the end, I look at this and go, what did Knuckles learn from the past? What progress have we made? And the answer is nothing. We haven't. This is made all the worse by the fact that we don't learn about the past with Knuckles. No, instead we get way more details than him at completely random intervals. Like one page will be Knuckles material, the next will be the past. Or maybe there will be 2 pages of Knuckles material and then 2 pages of the past. No exaggeration, this is how these issues are structured, with this constant stop and start and back and forth that sucks all the action out of the Knuckles half and makes the drama of the past awkward. And then there's the elephant in the room, or rather the echidnas. In some ways, this is where the intrinsic hilarity of the comic combines with how you know these characters are normally portrayed in the games. Your brain knows there's supposed to be one Knuckles, but now there's Glasses Knuckles, and Cult Knuckles, and Depressed Knuckles, ultimately creating this trance-like state of enjoyment as I sit slack-jawed at what I am witnessing, with the added bonus that these stories are actually answering really good questions one might have about Knuckles and his past, yet doing so in the most overly self-serious and insane way possible. And the art, man, it's what really sells the absurd appeal of this, because these knockoff Knuckles aren't just any knockoffs. No, now they're high-quality recreations with the most minor of tweaks that are supposed to make them their own beings with their own motivations and their own stories, and something about that is so funny to me. But then there's the other side of this coin, because if you're having trouble telling these fellas apart, especially in the past where they're all colored in sepia tones, yeah, I don't blame you. I do too. The only thing that saved me was Professor Loett's lecture going through all this lore. Otherwise, I would have been lost. Because there's just so many characters to keep in my mind, and the differences between them can be shockingly subtle when I'm trying to keep track of these names and motivations, and also, you gotta remember that this is only the B plot in a story that often has a C and D plot in there too. And this type of structure, it persists throughout the first 4 arcs of the Knuckles comic, or in other words, the first 12 issues. It's genuinely tiring, and leads to a comic that often feels so stuffed full of material that it becomes at odds with itself, and especially at odds with its own titular character, who begins to drown beneath the onslaught of samey faces. It's really unfortunate too, because it's not as though the past material gets less interesting. No, this stuff is consistently engaging, and we get to see Echidna society from so many different angles, to the point where the floating island alone feels far more fleshed out than all the rest of Mobius combined. But when that's at the cost of a focused or engaging story, when it gets so hard to follow, when it leaves Knuckles as nothing more than a dude who exists to go, "What's going on?" while the other Echidnas refuse to answer his questions for no reason in particular, that's when I get frustrated. And that last point might even be the biggest problem, because for a story that's so concerned about learning from the past, where characters will literally tell Knuckles to shut up and listen like a good guardian boy, the other supposedly wiser Echidnas sure won't say much. If I had a nickel for every time these guys for no apparent reason told Knuckles he wasn't ready to learn something, or left out important details, or refused to elaborate, I'd probably be able to afford 1 issue of the Knuckles the Echidna comic book on eBay. At a point, it goes beyond being generally frustrating and makes me kinda hate the Echidnas. Like, you folks want my man to learn so badly, so teach him. And if you aren't going to tell him something, please at least have a reason. But unfortunately, once this keeps happening, all I can do is see straight past the narrative, and a behind-the-scenes desire to keep the mystery intact by having a character act mysterious, even when there is no mystery at all. What a shame.
It is the time of prophecy, Larley. I've come for the lad.
What for? I'm busy enough as it is.
Then you're about to get busier.
With Oh, Knuckles. But besides all that, after learning about this Echidna Society stuff, I've gotta say, I don't know if I want this teenager taking too many of these lessons to heart from them. Knuckles' ancestors, they have some interesting ideas. I mean, of course, there's his father Locke, who pretended to throw himself into a wall of fire to help prepare his son to be independent or something. I don't know. By the way, this is Guardian tradition. Talk about generational trauma, jeez. But my man, Grandfather Hawking here, may have some deeper problems than that. My man hates these filthy dingoes and he wants you to know about it. They'd raise a stink about something, we'd beat them back, they'd stay quiet for a while, and the cycle would begin again. Those freaking dingoes raising a stink, they could never conceptualize. They could only copy the echidnas and their superior technology. Yeah, Hawking, I think you might need to lie down, old fella. Now, to be clear, the dingoes are no saints. They're a militarized, warlike society that wanted to steal the echidna's technology, seemingly instigating conflicts with them. And this early in the comic, they're portrayed as mostly just that. Faceless, angry soldiers, not really a people group. But as this new generation of dingoes, far removed from the wars of the past, are integrated into echidna society, we start to see the comic's framing of them change into something more sympathetic. We see normal dingoes just living normal lives and having jobs. We find out that there are those who don't even like their militant ways but still have to serve terms. However, most of all, we realize that maybe there really is an anti-dingo sentiment among the echidnas. As when all the dingoes want are some houses to live in after their old ones are destroyed, it becomes extremely clear that the echidnas are purposefully dragging their feet. Yeah, they do not care, though they might be encouraged to speed up the process if the dingoes would simply unarm themselves. So is the comic aware that, as it tries to be more realistic and humanize a faceless enemy faction, that it's also recontextualizing Hawking and maybe the Guardians in a pretty negative light? I don't know, but the dingo housing crisis certainly is fascinating. Wait, what was I talking about before? Oh yeah, Knuckles. Anyway, beyond the dingo race relation side of this backstory, there's the fact that it's really complex. I mean, I'm sure some of you knuckleheads out in the crowd were able to understand this on your first go, but I'm more of a dumb dingo than a smart echidna, so my brain doesn't always pick up on this stuff on the first read through. I'll try to break it down. See, many years ago, these dingoes stole nukes from the echidnas and tried to fire them, so again, the dingoes definitely aren't innocent of any wrongdoings. Anyway, Hawking used the Guardian's technology to stop the nukes, but because of the fallout, he had to use another device called the Hyperzone Projector to place the echidnas in their city in one pocket dimension, while the dingoes went to another. So they lived there until, due to Robotnik's ultimate annihilator from the Endgame arc, the zones broke down, and now Hawking has to use his abilities to preserve the zones and bring them back to the regular reality. Unfortunately though, he's only got enough strength to reinstate one, so he chooses to save the Echidna City, meaning that yes, this is how the dingoes lost their home. Now let me make this clear. This is cool. This weird sci-fi alternate dimension plan from Hawking and the way it only gets wrecked because of Robotnik's interference, yes, please. That's the type of weird Archie Sonic crap I'm here for. But that's me describing it to you, breaking it down, making it simple. When I read it for the first time, I had no such guy, no teacher ant resting upon my shoulder to help me on this journey. So I read it, and I read it again, and I read it again, and I tried to understand it. I tried to pierce through the long-winded dialogue, through the stop and start explanations, through the contradictions and moments where Hawking would refuse to elaborate. Eventually, I did make sense of it. Eventually, I thought it was really cool. But getting to that point, well, that was pretty darn frustrating, and it killed my enjoyment of the story. But this is far from the worst of it, because some of you might be asking, wait, what about Knuckles? Well, anyway, next is the Forgotten Tribe arc. Here we learn that there's a whole group of echidnas who didn't agree with raising the island into the sky all those years ago, so they took off. From there, they searched for the promised land of the echidnas, Albion, guided by the mysterious ancient walkers, who eventually called upon the Guardian Aether to forsake his post and become the Mitre instead. If all these names are starting to get to be a bit much, all you need to do is be a good little Guardian and listen, buddy. Anyway, Aether eventually gets Knuckles involved in the tribe's business because the ancient walkers told him that he needs to do something else, I guess, and that Knuckles is gonna guide them. Alrighty then, so what clues are there out there that Knuckles is gonna find to guide them? What unique element of his character will allow them to finally find their promised land after all these years and after most of them have been roboticized, including Aether's own family, because yes, Archie Knuckles also knows how to slap you in the face with some dark backstories. Well, nothing about Knuckles is going to contribute. Instead, it's just that the ancient walkers guide them. Robbo the Hedge has a vision. Knuckles walks on water for some reason. And then some lady named Galana greets the tribe and Knuckles takes off using the gem they give him. Wow. Why did they need Knuckles for this again? Then there's Knuckles' dad, Locke. Oh boy, this guy, he's basically Knuckles' ultimate cyber stalker who watches his every move from the safety of the Guardian's home base, Haven. If his son gets in too much trouble, he'll help him out by creating an oasis in the desert, or stopping enemies' blasters from working, or doing whatever really. This way, it's nearly impossible for Knuckles to have a proper victory for himself. Now, you always know there's some other force at play, whether familial or technological or magical, that can save his bacon if the frying pan gets too hot. As such, these arcs are almost entirely devoid of proper tension because even though the comic wants me to take it seriously and ask serious questions, I also know that anyone or anything other than Knuckles can swoop in and steal Knuckles' conflicts from him at any moment regardless of his input. But okay, despite how disjointed all this is, there has to be at least a fairly consistent focus on technology and how the Echidnas have divided themselves based on that, right? Which, yes, fortunately, the Dark Legion has remained important. For one, we have Julie Sue, an ex-Legionnaire who Knuckles is quite surprised to find is a woman. Where's the rest of Kragok's thugs? Female! Give her a chance, Vector. I'm sure if we give her enough rope, she's bound to hang herself. Or through the Legion growing more powerful when Enerjack returns and becomes their new leader. Now, this arc here, it genuinely shows some promise. After all, Julie Sue has been hanging out with Knuckles and the Chaotix for a bit now, but most people still don't trust her. She feels alone. Of course, her and Knuckles can connect on that. They're both a bit lost right now. And so, in a likable, personality-driven moment, one of the few in the comic thus far, Knuckles decides that he wants to try and help Julie Sue fit in or find some proper friends. Awesome. How's he gonna do that? Well, he's gonna go ask Archie. So he goes looking for him. And he looks. And he looks for other people. And he looks. And no one's around. So he looks. And oh, would you guess? He's still looking. Yeah, that nice setup for him to actively help Julie Sue. Maybe allow the obvious romance angle they're going for actually be given any development or chemistry. No, we aren't going to focus on that, nothing. Instead, we just cut to the actual plot important stuff while Knuckles uselessly roams around and gets confused. Whatever, at least things are finally heating up as Enerjack faces off against Knuckles. When fighting someone with such awesome might, however, Knuckles has little hope. It really sells Enerjack as a powerful force. The way he's toying with Knuckles, teleporting him to space and into the deep sea, but Knuckles just won't give up and is even mocking the demigod, causing Enerjack to snap and break down Knuckles to his individual molecules and... Okay, yeah, this is... Yeah, I'm with ya! How's Knuckles gonna get out of... Oh, the ancient walkers saved him. They just bring him back to life, no problem. It couldn't even be his friends that save him. Maybe Julie Sue somehow. Heck, I'd even take his dad over this. But hey, at least Enerjack might still be cool. He's attacking Echidnapolis with the Dark Legion. They want revenge, but now the Dingoes and Echidnas are teaming up against this force together. Could this be what allows either side to learn to appreciate the other? Then there's Julie Sue who's stuck in the middle. We're gonna get a real fight now, baby. Wait, what the... Where'd Enerjack go? Wait, is that the mammoth guy from earlier? Oh, walkers. I don't want to see this guy's the main villain right now. That's not what this was about. This guy's been in exactly 2 terribly written stories before, where he went on and wouldn't stop talking, and oh yeah, they also looked like this. Then he gets beat up, and even when he has a victory, he's got his frickin' ding-dong out. He comes out of nowhere. I don't care if he looks cool here or that this was his big master plan to free Enerjack. He hasn't earned it. In a story where we're constantly moving focus away from our hero, we're now even doing it to our villains. Even our tangent has tangents. But yeah, that's right, folks. Mammoth freaking Mogul swoops in and drains Enerjack of his power with the Sword of Acorns and is now the actual big bad guy we have to fight, abruptly ending the entire story arc. Also, we can have a battle where the Ancient Walkers explicitly manipulate every single thing to force our heroes to win. Super Sonic, Hyper Knuckles, and the new form of Turbo Tails are entirely wasted on this crappy villain who uses big words in lieu of an actual menacing presence. Not like he really had a chance to be cool anyway, when the whole issue looks like this and the speech bubbles are devouring the pages in a sea of this cluttered ugliness. I genuinely get a headache trying to read it. Oh, but I couldn't just read it once either, because I don't know what's happening. So I read it, and I read it again, and I read it again. And apparently, Locke and all his granddads use chaos magic to combine Mogul with the Chaos Emeralds, which in turn creates the Master Emerald or something. Why did we do this? And why does it get worse? Why does the comic get worse every time Mogul appears? Look at this sick cover. This is one of the coolest things in the whole comic. A super form battle royale, and it looks like this. Why does Mogul have to be here? I hate it. I hate it. Oh yeah, these writers are also done with Enerjack. They aren't bringing him back. Walkers have mercy. I need a break. Something fun. Wait, do I smell cotton candy? Is that the sound of roller coaster rides? It's finally time, kids. We're here, everyone. Grab your tickets and prepare to die. Because, oh my gosh, is that the drug-laced chili dog?
Don't you put it in your mouth. Don't you put it in your mouth. Don't you stuff it in your face. Don't stuff it in your face. So it might look good to eat. So it might look good to eat. And it might look good to taste. And it might look good to taste. You could get sick. Yuck. Real quick.
Are you prepared to take a trip to the center of Charmy Bee's mind? I sure hope you are, because it's time for the drug-laced chili dog arc, baby. We begin with Harry the cab-driving dingo. Much like me, he's tired of the echidna's crap and narrates his distaste in film noir-esque tones. He wants to keep to himself, doesn't need the trouble. That is, until he finds Charmy Bee holding the shaking body of his best friend Mello in his arms. What's he gonna do, look the other way? No, he must drive them to the hospital. Looks like the kid might not make it, but he's gotta do what he can do. He gets them where he needs to go. But Mello Bee, he still dies. He dies of lemon, sundrop, dandelion poisoning. So now our Chaotix friends, along with Harry and Julie Sue, are going to need to get to the bottom of this. Their first lead? Well, Renfield T. Rodent's reopened amusement park, of course, where Charmy and Mello were hanging out and having a good old time before it became an abusement park and perhaps ended Mello's life. After they arrive, though, the gang can't find anything suspicious, and so they get hungry. Unfortunately for them, Julie Sue is the only one with the brain, and the rest of them eat chili dogs from a nearby stand. And then it begins. A trip. A bad trip. Already, this issue it's ridiculous. The Sonic comic is tackling the dangers of drugs through bad chili dogs in an amusement park stand. An amusement park we visited back in the gag era days, no less. And really, it just adds a lot to this insanity that the poisoned food is chili dogs of all things. Could you twist the comic's original innocence any further than making Sonic's favorite food part of this? It's hilarious, and it's even funnier that buried beneath this craziness, there is potentially a lesson about being careful who you take food from for little kids. But of course, it's delivered to us via the most over-the-top and needlessly tragic way possible. Really, this is basically a precursor to the comic's dark comedy days. And it only gets wilder as Charmy Bee's drug-induced hallucinations reveal his innermost fears. See, he's really a prince who ran away from his kingdom and his responsibilities there because he wanted to still have a fun time and go on adventures. And now he feels guilt and worry over that, shown through a genuinely well-done presentation of drug-induced hysteria. Wow, that's, not a sentence I ever expected to say about the Knuckles the Echidna comic book series. Meanwhile, I genuinely just like that we're exploring different sides of the society through someone like Harry, humanizing the dingoes through this tired taxi driver with a heart of gold as he struggles both to exist within Echidna society, getting pushed around on this insane adventure by the Chaotix and such, but also being threatened by General Von Stryker, the dingo's leader, told that he better not integrate too well. So yeah, we have that, and then we have moments that are just straight up hilarious. The Chaotix have always been fun. Stuff like Vector stubbornly saying, "You mean all my homeboys don't enjoy shaking and baking out here?" when they're about ready to die from heat stroke. Or, "Since you don't like my rap, why not grab a nap? I just heard Dudley Do-Rag and Julie Locks are going medieval in South Towns." I could just keep going. I swear, nearly every line out of this guy's mouth is hilarious, and the way he bounces off the other Chaotix brings this all together. And this poor nurse having to deal with all of them, getting more and more frightened as each member of the team awakens from the drug-laced chili dog stupor. Mighty's lifting the bed! Oh no! Meanwhile, Harry, Julie Sue, and Constable Remington are trying to get to the bottom of this incident at the park. And as they do that, we get these ridiculous scenes between Renfield and Ebony Hare, a mob boss of sorts who's calling the shots and making Renfield do this crap to the chili dogs as a way to get the masses hooked on his goods. Julie Sue gets some opportunities to look pretty cool while fighting these goons, and stuff like Ebony Hare yelling, "You're dead! I saw you die!" feels straight out of a B-list thriller, and I am here for it. I've got to get out of here. It ain't safe for a Goyle. Anyway, after the incident is taken care of through the combined power of our chaotic friends, Harry, Julie Sue, and Remington, Charmy B returns home to his kingdom, not only to bury a fallen friend, but to return to his family and claim his place as prince. This experience, it's made him grow up, and how couldn't it? I mean, after hearing what happened, his parents may have forgiven me, but it would be a long time before I could. My best friend and I would never share the sun again, but he would be in my heart, always. But then we smash cut to him looking pretty dang happy with his family, and he thinks, I thought I would have fun with my friends and found in my family something more meaningful instead. Funny how things work out in the end. Wow. Yeah, I guess you could call that working out. I don't know. What a wild way to land on the message that running away from responsibilities can be dangerous. Like, I get it. That's not necessarily a bad message. I'm not even inherently opposed to the message about family being important or whatever. But this way of going about it, Charmy's friend dying because of a bad chili dog in an amusement park, and that being the catalyst for his change? I love it. It's so absurd and fun, and for once, although there's still a clear message, it's just a little bit of spice at the end, rather than what we spend the vast majority of the story focusing on. In the end, this arc is a definite bright spot in what has so far been a mostly frustrating series, and I'm so thankful for its existence. I genuinely love it, and each time I go back, I have just as much fun as the last. But, you might have noticed something here. This is the first time I've been completely positive about the Knuckles comic, and yet I haven't mentioned Knuckles. Well, okay, it's not like I mentioned Knuckles a lot before, but that was for different reasons, and anyway, he isn't here. He gets 2 pages in each issue where we cut to him messing around and fighting some dudes, while his dad watches on and comments about how powerful he is and stuff, and unfortunately, Knuckles' lack of importance is going to persist from here for some time. My man has gone from asking constant questions, but at least getting time on the page, to being the C-plot in his own comic. But that doesn't mean these next arcs aren't worth discussing. No, they have some of the most telling material in the comic thus far, and mark a major change of direction for the story as a whole. Up until now, we've gotten bits and pieces of the Brotherhood of Guardians' internal workings, but in these coming arcs, we're about to get a big boy look at the inside, and it's immediately telling. Just take this scene where the Brotherhood's members are discussing Sonic's recent world adventure. Now, the Brotherhood is supposed to be framed as this noble group that watches over all of Mobius, making sure everything stays balanced. But, weirdly, when Sonic is out here helping people and trying to stop a major force of evil, they're annoyed. He's making work for them, nothing but trouble apparently, and leaving messes that they have to clean up. Which, isn't this their job? I mean, I would understand if Sonic wasn't helping people, but he is, and yet here they are complaining. Not a great look. And it's in scenes like this that one fact becomes clear. The Brotherhood's mission statement isn't that they need to do good or protect the world from evil or anything nearly that noble. No, their mission statement, whether they realize it or not, is pure apathy. They are a group who protects the status quo, regardless of if that status quo is good in the first place, and anything that serves to interrupt their time kicking back in Haven is treated as an annoyance or headache. In fact, when faced with problems, they will frequently take the path of least resistance, even when that path is, without a doubt, morally wrong. For example, Elias. I've praised this guy a lot, and of course that means I've mentioned how he was missing for a long time from the Acorn Kingdom and his family. So, what happened to him? Where was he? Well, when Elias was a small child, he and his mother Alicia went on a trip to the floating island. However, their ship was struck down by the Overlanders. Alicia was injured, and the Guardians lied to the Overlanders in order to protect them. So they hid Alicia, mortally injured but kept alive in this tube, and they hid Elias too. Why didn't they send him home? Simple. They were worried that this would reveal to the Overlanders that they had lied, and that they were taking sides in the ongoing war, and that they could get dragged into it themselves. At first, this might sound at least somewhat reasonable, except there are a couple problems here. For one, we know from past stories that Max and Sally visited the island, so couldn't that also be misconstrued as taking sides? More than that even, couldn't they have given Elias back to the family secretly during one of these visits since they apparently weren't a problem? Better yet, why didn't they give Elias back after the war was over? Why didn't they give him back after Robotnik was dead? Heck, they didn't even have to wait till he was dead. After all, Robotnik had already attacked the island, so it wasn't like neutrality was a big deal back then. Of course, some of this is no doubt a byproduct of the story, at least to some extent, being made up as it went along. But these inconsistencies, they still exist, and they still color the reader's interpretation of the Guardians if they stop to think about it. And that takes what, at first, feels like a somewhat reasonable political stance and morphs it into nothing short of a kidnapping. And this isn't even some serious moral stance they have. No, as soon as Jeffrey's group hunts down Elias and makes their way here, the Guardians just give up Alicia, who they've kept hidden, and have no worries about letting Elias go home either. Again, this just makes me wonder why they kept him for so long in the first place. But of course, it's simple. This is less of a headache. That's all it's ever about with the Guardians. I mean, maybe that's why later we learn that they tied up a child, threw him off the island, and attempted to drown him because he was mean to Knuckles and stole his yo-yo. Oh, sweet, so we can add attempted child murder to the list. Wow. These guys, they're monsters. And not just that, they're pretty stupid too, and the infighting goes on and on. After all, though it's spoken about in vague tones, we get a whole lot of arguing between them about something to do with Knuckles' strength. Something they played a part in giving him that they all agreed to do in the past. Really, they spend more time going back and forth against each other than they do getting work done or helping people. And that stupidity I mentioned? Apparently they can't even tell their own members apart since this faker replaced one of their own for many years. A plot that, on its face, could make sense but is just unbelievably stupid. See, this guy is named Moratory Rex, and he's impersonating Tobor, Hawking's son. After a heated battle between the two of them many years ago, they were left seriously injured, and somehow their injuries allowed other people to mix them up and believe Moratory was Tobor. So then Moratory was able to sneak into the Guardians. Guess the Echidnas can't even tell each other apart anymore. Once Julie Sue randomly stumbles upon Tobor though, things change. So now how is Moratory going to keep up this deception? Okay, but before we get to the question the comic wants us to ask, I've got to ask another one. Tobor, buddy, where the heck were ya? How long have you been stumbling through the desert? When did this happen? When this happened to you, it looks like your dad was a young man and now he's an old fella, and these echidnas, they live for like hundreds of years. You didn't try to go home out of shame, I guess? But what, for that long? And now someone just happens to find you. And then there's the matter of how Moratory impersonated him in the first place. The comic attempts to justify this through saying their injuries made this easier for him, but Lara Leia is at least there to go, but how didn't your wife know? Tobor is actually also wondering about that as well. Now, do you think we actually follow up on that though? Anyway, Knuckles meets Tobor, hears his story, randomly poofs into Haven, and he and Moratory fight. What was Moratory's plan this whole time, by the way? And then Tobor and Kragok battle, and they end up in some other dimension or something, and they're gone, and what the heck was the point of this whole arc? Alright then, back to the Brotherhood. On a deeper level, we've got to remember that they're the ones who have worked hardest against the Dark Legion in their techno-obsessed, shadowy ways, all while they secretly spy on the populace using technology their forefathers rejected, all while the rest of Echidna society had started using technology again. I think it's pretty easy to see the problems here. Speaking of problems though, yeah, remember the whole jumping into a wall of fire thing? What's the logic behind that? Well, eventually we find out that one of the Guardian's sons, who had just joined the group, previously died in the line of duty. So the group decided that they all needed to be involved in the future Guardians training to avoid a repeated tragedy, which is why they spy on their fresh recruits, and eventually why they decide to pretend to end it all. So yeah, most of the Brotherhood's extreme actions stem from trauma, whether it's Dimitri's death, Edmund's death, or this fella's death, and a belief that they are truly doing what's best for their younger members. Unfortunately for them though, their response to trauma only creates more trauma. And I know I've mentioned this before and I'm gonna mention it again, but come on! I've read this comic multiple times, and I need to know why these nutjobs jump into the fire! What? But this is where things get more interesting, because the comic is at least somewhat aware of this. I mean, that point I just made about technology, one of the Guardians mentions these inconsistencies while the others make excuses or tell him to not start fights right now. Sure, there's no way all of this was purposeful, all their stupidity and apathy and just how far they'll go with that, but at least some of it is, and the comic is becoming aware of itself. And a story that at first was all about Knuckles learning the value of tradition and wisdom from his forefathers begins to ask questions. What if tradition doesn't have the same value we first thought? What if, instead of learning wisdom from the past, he needs to learn from the mistakes that can be found there? What if the Guardians are just a bunch of self-important hypocrites? And the way we're going to go about asking these questions, well, it's by pulling from the real world in just about the strangest way possible.
Robotropolis 3228. During Dr. Robotnik's takeover through robotization, the SWATbots came for the foxes, and I did not speak up because I was not a fox. Then they came for the rabbits, and I did not speak up because I was not a rabbit. Then they came for the squirrels, but I did not speak up because I was not a squirrel. Then they came for the hedgehogs, and I did not speak up because I was an echidna. Then they came for me, and by that time, nobody was left to speak up. Anonymous.
We're here, folks. Echidnopolis is officially Germany in 1933. Hail Dimitri. Yeah, Archie Knuckles isn't afraid to go there. And I couldn't be happier. This is bonkers. Truly buck wild even. The comic is no longer just trying to tap into deeper themes or ideas in its own weird ways. No, now it's time to pull from real life politics, clearly drawing inspiration from atrocities of the past. And yet inspiration honestly feels like too vague of a word. Nah, this is begging ya to recognize these symbols and events overlaid on top of the ongoing Archie Knuckles narrative, and it is downright special what this leads to. See, throughout this arc, the Dark Legion attempts to overtake Echidna society from within, first by lobotomizing a high-ranking political official named Pravda and turning him into their puppet, giving them an in for the upcoming election. Right, of course you'd do that. With the growing tensions between dingoes and echidnas, this seems like a pretty darn good time for the Dark Legion to strike and take back their city. Never mind that other echidnas in positions of power are being threatened if they don't support them. Of course, though, these threats soon extend to regular, everyday people, and the Legion eventually starts rounding up echidnas and dingoes alike and shipping them off. It's wild how quickly echidna society seems to fall apart here as soon as the Dark Legion has a foothold. Plus, since Morituri Rex was just in Haven, they're even able to attack the Brotherhood and capture most of them in one fell swoop. All of this means that the Dark Legion is no longer just the Dark Legion. Now they're vessels for Echidnaopolis' downfall into an extremist nightmare, and we aren't just going to do that through some unique made-up story. Instead, we do this through a modified version of the poem, First They Came. We do this through the Dark Legion rounding up dingoes and sending them to the sewers. We do this through other people getting carted away from the rest of society, basically taken to camps. Yeah, this story definitely grabbed my attention. Now, do I think it was wise of the comic to be this direct with its references to real-life atrocities? Probably not, because it does introduce a lot of thematic muddiness into the mix. For instance, using the Dark Legion for the purposes of being this real-life political parallel feels pretty misguided because the Dark Legion already have a distinct history and reasoning behind their actions. But now all of that is funneled through this, and that inherently makes me ask, what is the comic trying to say here? Heck, as we've already established, the comic consistently wants me to take it on that serious level. And as soon as you start asking those questions about this arc, man, it gets confusing. Because I do believe way back when that the Dark Legion's core ideas actually made more sense than the government in Edmonds to me. Of course, they're framed as going straight up crazy after the fact, but again, initially, this was just about technology. And if someone swooped in and told me, hey, I'm gonna take all your technology now, all because of some irrational fear, then I would also be pretty upset about that. And so, after the way the comic slowly made the dingoes more sympathetic, ultimately culminating in this arc where we see them living in squalor, I would have liked the comic to take a similar path with the Dark Legion. Like, there's a lot of potential here to do that. I highly doubt every member of the Dark Legion was insane and evil, so we could have leaned into how their hatred was stoked by the original Guardians when they were locked away in the Twilight Cage off and on for literal centuries. Basically, we could have gotten a more nuanced view of them, based on further exploring events we had already seen in the story from a different angle. And the reason I think it's reasonable to want that is because the comic seems to think there's value in what the Dark Legion are saying about how they were mistreated. How the society and officials and police still claim an anti-technology stance when their city looks like this, justifying it through pragmatism. In particular, one of the Brotherhood of Guardians' own members is the first to consider this hypocrisy that we see. Although he's outnumbered in this case. Speaking of the Guardians, what muddles this political conflict even further is that, as mentioned before, I don't really think the Brotherhood are great guys either, and therefore don't really care that they get put through the ringer by their techno-obsessed cousins. And a lot of that stems from just how high and mighty the Brotherhood has been about their own use of technology, as if this extremist group they're facing now has no relation to their own extreme reactions in the past. Oh yeah, the Dark Legion was bad, so we needed to fight fire with fire to stop them at the time. Okay, sure, but also now let's just keep using tech and use it to spy on the world and our people, with nearly all our good deeds using technology being off-screen in favor of on-screen cynicism and cruelty. The whiplash is insane. So seeing a monster that they helped create come back to bite them is weirdly satisfying and cathartic. It also simply feels like the comic is more aware than ever that the so-called noble echidnas maybe aren't so infallible. But then making the Dark Legion go all "Hail Dimitri" like this, yeah, that complicates things. My own emotions about the story I've been reading are confused by this constant bludgeoning with political references I just can't make sense of anymore, despite the comic clearly wanting me to consider them in its depth. This is further complicated when we learn that Edmund and Dimitri's past proposal to lower the floating island wasn't just rejected because it could be dangerous. Nah, it was rejected because it would upset other echidnas' political plans and aspirations. In other words, now Dimitri's initial reaction to grab the Chaos Siphon and take power for himself, yeah, it's still not great, but it's more justified than before. His ego wasn't simply bruised, he wasn't simply impatient. No, he was told straight to his face that this wouldn't happen because the government was corrupt and going through regular means wouldn't work. So this makes me think we are supposed to be sympathetic to the Dark Legion and their plight, but then this makes me think we aren't. You think this political symbolism is haphazardly tossed in though? Well, how about this same echidna ending off his political speech with a modified version of John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, apparently? How about Menaker, yes, this dude from way back, already being given Hail Dimitri type ideology? How about the Brotherhood's member Spectre being given a quote that's based on Franklin D. Roosevelt's inauguration speech too? How about the dingoes carrying dingo power signs and protesting for equal rights, baby? How about the fact that the dingoes themselves were originally supposed to be Hail Dimitri types of people before the editor made them change it? So now their leader's right-hand man is still named Goebbels, as in Goebbels, as in one of the closest associates of Hitler. What does it all mean? On the one hand, I can see how this could make this arc unbearable for some people, or maybe even a little offensive. Just seeing the Knuckles comic swing for these high concepts and failing spectacularly. Flippantly using these real-world speeches and symbols and civil rights movements with very little tact. But on the other hand, well, you probably know what I'm gonna say. I kinda love it. I adore that Archie Knuckles, for better or worse, went all in on this because just look at it. To say this is hilarious to me would be a gross understatement. Why? Why did this happen? How did this happen? Who signed off on this? Who thought it was a good idea? And it's those meta questions that makes this one of the funniest and most unique things I've ever read. I truly love thinking about the stuff, untangling all these webs of ideas in my mind, getting real into it, and then having to go fact check by looking at these ridiculous echidnas. Adding to all this craziness, though, is the fact that this is genuinely the strongest the Knuckles' comics plot has ever been, because our man Knuckles eventually gets captured by the Dark Legion, along with Julie Sue and Stryker. Here, though Knuckles still isn't playing that active of a role, we're actually finally getting some interesting material regarding his mysterious powers, which the Brotherhood has been real quiet on. See, Dimitri wants to experiment on Knuckles to figure out what makes him tick because, of course, he wants this power for himself. Quickly, he realizes that Knuckles may be a bioengineered ultimate echidna, but as his energy begins to consume their base and destroy their instruments, the Dark Legion is forced to flee, and Echidna society at large is safe from their tyranny for the time being. Finally, we're getting some answers here that aren't entirely vague, and the Dark Legion conflict is actually going places. The comic is. It's got a moving plot, momentum, a central conflict between Knuckles and Dimitri, and no matter how ridiculous this stuff has gotten, Dimitri feels like a genuine threat now, tearing Echidna society apart from within, and his design. Look how cool his design is! Holy heck! The amount of detail, the multicolored wires, the eye jutting out, his mismatched feet and half-robotic quills, and everything. He looks awesome! Then there are moments like this with skin melting off a fake echidna's robotic body. It's nuts! I love how this arc looks. Give me more, Mr. Valentino. All in all, while the drug-laced chili dog arc is my favorite silly section of Knuckles, this is by far my favorite story section. Because if we strip away all the awkward references, calm down and take the comic a little less serious than it wants me to for a second, then this is the most interesting thematic direction the comic has ever gone in. Here, the previous roles of these characters have been irrevocably changed. The Guardians are questioning their own actions, and the comic itself is so actively questioning its original themes and morals that it's almost deconstructing itself. And all of that makes me ask, where do we go from here? How much wilder and wackier and more fascinating can we get? This conflict between Dimitri and Knuckles, I genuinely want to see that come to a head. It's crunch time, baby. Let's do it to... Oh, what the... Wait, what? You've got, really? Seriously? Oh, baby! Why'd you go and do that for? I'm not sure I even like you. I was simply returning you the favor. Favor? Yeah, like when you tried to cheer me up. Yeah, well, okay, just this once. If that's what you want. Julie Sue? Yes? Don't ever do that again. Wouldn't even consider it. Oh, yes, I would. I just wish I understood why. It really wasn't that bad, actually. That felt kind of nice. Yeah, so about the plot picking up. Instead of following up on the Dark Legion stuff, it's romance time. Because Julie Sue and Knuckles, well, their hormones have been chugging for some time, and that choo-choo train is coming into the station and ready to 3D blast. And if I sound excited at the prospect, it's because, yes, I am. See, the Knuckles' comics way of handling male-female romance has so far been really funny to me. There's this sort of women, can't live with him, can't live without him, energy to a lot of the dudes in this story. Like, they just can't comprehend their chosen mate, and it's so bad that the echidnas in particular have this thing called the soul touch, which basically means you're destined to be, even if you can't really understand each other. None of you have relationships I subscribe to, but some of the dialogue surrounding it has got a good laugh out of me. However, that's the sort of thing that I could see becoming tiring in large doses and that I would understand someone not enjoying at all. Perhaps even more so when the one getting this treatment is Julie Sue, an inherently interesting character as this ex-Dark Legion soldier turned ally combined with probably one of the sickest designs in the entire comic, thanks Bass, but who, unfortunately, just gets sidelined in most of the arcs she's in. Which is why I'm really surprised to say that this romance arc is just genuinely really fun and charming throughout. Here, the Knuckles comic has shifted from politically fueled science fiction with a point to a romantic sitcom following Knuckles and Julie Sue. There's this incredibly entertaining, campy energy to everything, along with goofy art that backs up this absurdity perfectly. And the situations and circumstances here are suitably ridiculous, like Archie playing matchmaker and poofing Knuckles into a restaurant while Julie Sue is on a date with another guy. I mean, look at this echidna's little mustache. How couldn't you love it? The ants insult Locke for the relationship between him and Lara Leigh. Father, that was uncalled for. Then there's Vector bad-talking Knuckles and Julie Sue, and Knuckles going, you really want to know? I'll tell you what's happening. There's a girl I may be in love with, and I have to listen to your trash. Why don't you just get off my case, you crazy crock? As a fellow angry teenager once upon a time, I can definitely relate to Knuckles just snapping. It feels shockingly real, while still being hilarious and stupid. And then Knuckles finally works up the courage to ask Julie Sue out, and she's making the silly cute face, and he walks off with his chest all puffed out, but the art's weird and he looks like he's wearing pajamas even though that's just his skin, but she said yes! Woo! Wow, this arc is fun! And this is easily the most I've ever cared about Julie Sue or Knuckles as a couple, and it's entirely thanks to this young, dumb love tone. You finally did it, comic. You won me over on Knuckles and Julie Sue. I now pronounce you pretty cute under highly specific circumstances, I guess. Whoa, Knuckles, I know you're into crunch time, but save some for dessert. But with all that out of the way, there's something more serious that we need to discuss. A mysterious father we've waited a long time to properly learn about. It's time. Knuckles' father, Locke, is awful. Let's just get that out of the way. He assists the Brotherhood in being self-aggrandizing hypocrites. He spies on his son and refuses to speak to him even when others tell him he should. He gets snarky at his ex-wife for even simple suggestions like that maybe he should be an actual dad for once. And yeah, he does all this while having an air of superiority, the sort of pride in his own distance, even though he sure can't describe why pretending to die in front of his son was the best way to teach him about self-reliance, or why their traditions are so important, or why he needs Knuckles to learn on his own but will still help him out randomly. Well, we do get an answer for that last question. After all, isn't it a father's duty to look after his son? This guy is. He's a lunatic as far as I'm concerned. And boy, oh boy, is he compelling. Easily, out of all the characters we've met in Archie, Sonic, and Knuckles so far, Locke is the most interesting to consider and discuss. He has layers, motivations stacked on motivations, and there's just so much to unpack with him. First and foremost, Locke is a byproduct of tradition. He was raised to be a guardian and clearly believes that is his role in the world and that there's nothing more important than that, not even his relationship with his own son. And it's those feelings that not only compel him to follow along with these traditions, no matter how harmful, but to take them more seriously and extremely than even his own forefathers. Because of this, Locke has sacrificed a lot. Of course, he's given up a normal relationship with his kid and missed out on a lot of his life. He's also separated from his wife, even though he still clearly wants to be with her. Why? Well, because she was uncomfortable with how far Locke was taking Knuckles' guardian training, and she wanted more of a say in how her son would be raised. She was scared that her kid would miss out on just being a child. But that's not the guardian way. Of course not. So when she tried to take Knuckles and leave, Locke said no. And how would she fight back against him? He has exceptional powers and abilities. Soon after, Locke would suddenly take Knuckles away from his mother anyway to begin his training, and instead of telling Knuckles about their eventual divorce or anything about his mother really, Locke settled to just tell him that she was gone, and nothing more. A family broken, a son lost, and all because of a husband's ambitions and ideals and traditions. But Locke didn't just sacrifice himself. No, he sacrificed his son's chances at ever having a remotely normal life, even by guardian standards. Because one night, Locke had a vision of a terrible future. A future where he believed the world would end and a son who he didn't even know yet would die. So to prepare for that day, Locke performed genetic experiments on his own DNA to pass on to his future child. But even that wasn't enough for Locke, as when Knuckles' egg was laid, he took it and bathed it in Chaos Emerald radiation, all behind his wife's back, all to create a savior for the world. Was it an easy choice for him? No, but Locke did it, because that was his duty, because the Ancient Walkers and Aether and Aurora demanded something of him. And Locke doesn't regret it. It was necessary for the good of the Brotherhood and the good of the world. So when his son finally finds him and grows frustrated, he defends his actions, imploring Knuckles to see things from his perspective. He had to do it. What else would Knuckles have had him do? Yet there's another side to Locke too, because Locke doesn't mean for Knuckles to find him. No, they just happen to be in the same area and Knuckles spots him. Locke, however, runs away until it becomes clear that it's too late for him to make a clean escape, and he allows Knuckles to catch up to him. So why did Locke run? Well, I think it's because deep down he has trouble facing his son. Again, he stayed hidden from him for so long, past the point where other guardians expect him to. He claims it's to train him, but after Lorelei talks to him and tells him to be a father, he considers her words and even, for a moment, goes out to find Knuckles and reunite. However, then he takes another moment to think about that. Nah, this was a mistake. He can't face his son. It's not time yet. And though the implication is that he thinks his son isn't ready, the truth lies under the surface. Locke isn't ready. The many ways Locke has tried to control Knuckles' life goes beyond this and extends to his very name. See, we learned that there was a group known as the Knuckles clan, and many of these people eventually attacked this group of cats known as the Felidae. But Locke, he wanted his son to wipe away the scars of the past, to build bridges that would overwrite these horrible things. And so he named him after the clan. On its own, this could be a kind of sweet sentiment, that he believes in his son so much. But when combined with all the rest of Locke's character, with Locke abandoning his son at a young age, with him making him a mutant and forcing him to be the world's supposed savior, well, then it takes on a different tone. It becomes yet another way that Locke seeks to control Knuckles' life, to decide the course of his destiny, and another way that Knuckles must carry the baggage of his people's history whether he likes it or not. Because tradition has already decided his place in the world, because visions of the future have, and above all else, because Locke has. Beneath all of these actions and contradictions, there's a web of complex motivations that guide Locke. His need to be in control, his fear that the world will end, his longing to be with his son, but his anxiety surrounding that too. All of that is communicated through not only his actions, but the art too. Take this moment where Knuckles finally hugs his dad, this uncomplicated relief and happiness on his face. But Locke, to me, looks both happy and uncomfortable. Still, though, he chooses to hug his son, to hold him, and to finally reveal everything. No matter how strange the words he uses to describe some of these events are, he's still telling Knuckles. And this doesn't feel like a pre-planned event. It feels like finally his desire to be with his son has beaten his desire to run away and hide. And despite all the ways he's hurt his son, when he finally says, "I love you," back to Knuckles, I have no doubt that, in his own broken way, that's true. Eventually, Locke even attempts to make up with Lorelei to some extent, as she wants Knuckles to have the family together for his birthday. So for once, he sets aside his pride, and he and Lorelei share a hug with their son. Even if she won't love him again, he'll do this for his kid, because it's high time he did. In this moment, it's genuinely touching. I feel for Knuckles. I want him to have this. He deserves to be happy. But none of this is to excuse Locke's actions. As far as I'm concerned, he's a monster, both in how he speaks and small moments in his behavior at large. Like when he describes a previous Guardian's valiant act of self-sacrifice as nothing more than succumbing to the bravado and recklessness of youth. Or when he says he's finally going to give Knuckles some personal space and stop spying on him, only for the very next day to happily be spying on him again. Oh, and may I remind you of the kid he attempted to drown along with the Brotherhood? Or how about the contrast between his and Lorelei's expression when the child he stole from her and irradiated becomes everything he wanted, as he proudly tells his son he's every bit the genetically enhanced mutant offspring you were intended to be. Yeah, that's... What's wrong with you? At this point in the comic, I'm not sure how aware the story is of Locke's problems. Like, it's hard to say whether his actions are meant to be retroactively justified by some world-ending event or not. You know, the ends justify the means, that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is that, even beyond what he did to his son, he only exists as the most extreme of a deeply flawed group. Locke is awful, Locke is a terrible father, and yet, despite that, Locke truly believes he's a savior. And it's so incredibly compelling. All right, folks, this is it. We've reached the end of the Knuckles the Echidna comic book series. Yep, with its 32nd issue, it was canceled, ending on this incredible panel. But worry not, Rad Red's adventures are far from over. The bulk of his and the other Echidna's material has simply been moved to the B stories of the main comic. And on its own, the banishment to the B stories is probably for the best. If anything, I felt that the Knuckles comic could have trimmed the fat for some time. So yeah, this is far from the worst fate. It could even be a blessing in disguise. Besides, the central narrative of the Knuckles comic gets a chance to come to a head in a super special. And this story is actually really cool. We start with this crazy explosion propelling Knuckles off the floating island and then immediately cut back to the past. So the details are foggy, but we know something bad is about to happen. And Knuckles' narration recounting the day before this disaster leans into that by giving us a better look at his inner feelings leading to this event. First, his mom and Windmaker, a fabulous man if you ask me, are getting married. Though Knuckles isn't exactly thrilled at this prospect, he understands how happy Wind makes his mom and wants what's best for her above all else. Another genuinely sweet moment. Something the comic has honestly been having more and more of lately, and that personal touch is what it needs, especially with the threat of some impending explosion looming over everyone's heads. It gives me a great reason to care. Meanwhile, another Echidna named Matthias arrives at Haven, warning the Brotherhood that the Dark Legion is planning an attack soon. The Brotherhood, however, believes they're ready. So it seems that the Dimitri-Knuckles conflict is finally coming to a head after suddenly fading into the background all those issues ago. Sweet! It took a while, but I'm happy we're here. And given that explosion, I have no doubt they're actually going to do something impactful. But this isn't the only plot point that's returned, because the Dingoes they're getting focus again. See, they're still waiting on aid from the Echidnas, and they're about ready to take drastic measures by threatening random Echidnas and forcing the government's hand. Remington hears of this and tries his best to quell the unrest. After all, the council is on the verge of making an announcement of a plan of action. We're sure gonna build your dingo houses, guys. Just wait longer. Awesome. Good to know that we haven't forgotten about the dingoes, though. So sweet, there are a few plots going on, which at times has felt like a bit much for the comic, but here it works, because they're all tied together by this looming destruction. On top of that, there are also things I'm interested in and that we've needed to tie up or return to for a while. Splendid. And finally, there's Julie Sue. After that romance arc, I've warmed up to her and Knuckles as a pair, even if she's far from a favorite. However, her most interesting character trait has to be her ties to the Dark Legion, and what that means for Knuckles and the Brotherhood. After all, one of the Guardians, their own, having their soul touch mate be a member of the Dark Legion? Needless to say, some of them aren't fans, and it feels like there's a lot of potential to have those Dark Legion ties take the plot in interesting directions. And here, that actually happens, as the Dark Legion kidnaps Julie Sue, but not for the purpose of harming Knuckles. No, Dimitri simply still views her as one of their own, and is unwilling to leave her on the island. She can't be there. Something is about to go down. And so, as these plots come to a head, the Dark Legion sets their plan in motion, blasting the floating island with a massive laser, causing a huge explosion, and everyone and everything is erased in the fire. Except for Knuckles. Plot-wise, this is easily the most interesting place the Knuckles comic has ever been. I mean, the stakes are so much higher than before. The Brotherhood is gone, including Locke. Knuckles' mom's been zapped, along with almost every other echidna. Julie Sue's been captured. Most of the Chaotix have vanished. In one fell swoop, things have changed in a massive way, and I'm here for it. After all, for so long, the comic hasn't focused on Knuckles nearly enough. So this is kind of a great way to remove all that extra stuff and finally spend some time with Rad Red. Never mind the fact that most of the Deus Ex Machinas have been deleted too, making it so much easier to take these conflicts seriously and actually believe that Knuckles' actions will matter, that he won't just be saved at the last minute by his dad or some other, older, wiser echidna. But here's the thing. As much as it seems like the comic is getting its act together, that's just not the case. Because Archie Knuckles is about to lose its mind. In some ways, this feels a lot like the way past insanest era of the comic I previously discussed. For example, the art. So for the most part, the Knuckles stories have looked nice. Again, Gallen's done great work. There's been a lot of these awesome covers, and even though there have been some sketchier issues, by and large, I'd say it's safe to call the presentation a strong suit of the comic if we ignore all the samey echidna designs. But now in some issues, backgrounds are a thing of the past. I'm serious. These are just pictures of real life locations with the characters pasted over top of them. Look at them in the water. Look at the forest. Look at the... And the characters don't even look good themselves. What the heck? This is a mess, and it's kind of fun. Like, sure, it's hard to take it seriously, but I can't say I hated this or anything. It got a good laugh out of me, and besides, there are still times where it looks good. Thanks, Stephen Butler. But that's only the art, so what about the plot? Well, unfortunately, this is where the similarities to the way past insanest era end. Because the plot is just straight up bad, and not in a fun way. First, Aether immediately talks to Knuckles while he's floating on this raft, and he's whisked away using this magic rock to a bunch of other characters who are looking for Antoine's dad. Yeah, so never mind Knuckles actually figuring out stuff for himself. Shame the Dark Legion didn't blast Aether too. Anyway, Knuckles goes with this group to Albion, you know, the promised land where he took the other echidnas. And these echidnas here, especially their leader Galena, they are every bit as apathetic as the Brotherhood. See, they've got Antoine's robotic dad here as a prisoner of sorts, and they're about to dismantle him. Unfortunately, even though Knuckles can vouch for his friends and say that they're about to take Antoine's dad far away from here and back to Knothole, the people of Albion can't allow that because I guess it could be dangerous if Antoine's dad came back or something. So obviously now there's gonna be a big old conflict between Knuckles and these guys. One problem with that, I don't care. We still haven't addressed the Dark Legion conflict or Julie Sue's kidnapping, and instead of this stuff being used to accentuate that material, it's just yet another detour this comic goes on. Another way in which it's unable to focus. And at this point, that's getting real obnoxious. Whatever though, there's a fight over Antoine's dad, an explosion, Knuckles is ticked, and everything goes green. This is it. What Locke wanted. Knuckles' chaos powers have fully awakened, and he is now reborn as Green Knuckles. This green mean fighting machine has near limitless power as far as I can tell, warping time and space at will with a simple "no" and getting his friends to safety. But Knuckles? He clearly can't control these powers yet, which makes Galina worried. What if Knuckles hurts someone? A legitimate concern. So now Galina is going to try to help Knuckles control this awesome power so he can learn to use it responsibly. Nah, I'm just kidding. What do you want to do, give this woman a migraine? Instead, Galina hires Nick and Knack the Weasel, 2 sketchy bounty hunters, and has them bring Knuckles back using any means necessary, in this case by threatening Charmy Bee and his new wife Saffron's lives.
Of course, why wouldn't you do that?
Through this, though, they capture Knuckles, and the people of Albion decide to drain all the chaos energy out of him, even though they are quite certain this will kill him. But hey, they had no choice. May Aurora have mercy on your soul, Knux. I want to take a second to remind you that some of these guys are the same people Knuckles helped lead to their promised land. That's all, just wanted to throw it out there. Anyway, with the help of Charmy and Saffron, Knuckles is freed and eventually poofs himself to the Dark Legion. Not the way I would have got him there, would have rather had some build-up, but whatever. We're here, time to fight Dimitri. But no, that's not what's gonna happen, because Dimitri's motivations no longer make any sense. See, what happened before is that the Dark Legion blasted the other echidnas into an alternate dimension using the quantum beam, a poetic punishment Dimitri thinks, considering what the Guardians did to them in the past. This way, now the Dark Legion can reclaim this island for themselves. It's a neat idea that builds upon the past material with Hawking and Steppenwolf. Unfortunately, though, Dimitri apparently didn't really commit to this plan or something, because as soon as he sees Knuckles, he has a change of heart and decides that he's actually fine with setting the echidnas free again, so long as Knuckles will join the Dark Legion and accept him and the other Dark Legionnaires back into echidna society. He'll even help teach Knuckles how to use his green powers. What a unexpectedly reasonable guy all of a sudden. Actually, the only reason there's any conflict during this section of the comic is because Tobor and Kragok, remember them, randomly fall through the sky out of nowhere and crash into the quantum beam and destroy it. So now the Dark Legion can't bring the people back, and the only hope they have is Knuckles' reality warping abilities. If all of this sounds incredibly random, that's because it is incredibly random. Seriously, just when I think there's no way the comic can royally screw up the plot, it manages to do it in the most unsatisfying way. Where's the arc, the characters, the build-up and payoff, and just anything to sink my teeth into? Maybe the worst part of it is that at one point, I wanted the Dark Legion to become more sympathetic, but Dimitri's change of heart here, this Dimitri who truly wants peace between the Legion and Echidna society, it's nothing short of unconvincing and only serves to negatively impact the story, with Dimitri's constantly changing feelings about Knuckles throughout this arc, making him at best a weak villain and at worst a character with little to no internal consistency. So, what does this Dimitri and Knuckles team up lead to anyway? Well, Knuckles thinks he can go back in time to stop these events from ever occurring in the first place. That's the only way left to save everyone. However, no matter what he does at different key points in history, some other disaster will take place that will only leave the echidnas worse off. This is a thematically rich idea. Knuckles' dad imbued him with these powers in part to save the echidnas, and he gave him a name based on rectifying their past mistakes. Yet now, Knuckles can't do it. Even this power isn't enough to save the echidnas from their past. It was too much to ask of any one person. This probably sounds like praise, but I don't want you getting confused, because I'm only talking about the themes, like analyzing it after the fact can be cool. But plot-wise, enjoyment-wise, reading it and just experiencing it wise, no way! This is the most plotting, drab, dull material, all based on resetting conflicts and plot lines in such unsatisfying ways that, how would I ever care what's going on? Because now whenever the Knuckles stories tell me to care about something, I don't believe it. It's probably lying. It'll get retconned, replaced, erased. Seriously, what's the point anymore? Anyway, eventually Knuckles does get all the echidnas out of the other zone they're stuck in after Dimitri says,
Hey, why don't you get the other echidnas out of the zone they're stuck in?
I'm gonna strangle someone! Anyway, Knuckles does vouch for the Dark Legion and truly wants them to be brought back into society. An ultimate rejection of the Brotherhood's past and a pretty cool direction to take Knuckles' character in. You know, we're further deconstructing the comic. Even if this does feel pretty messy considering that the Dark Legion were portrayed as, yeah, whatever, could work, except of course it doesn't, because by the way, during all this political talk, we keep cutting to this alternate reality version of Knuckles' future daughter named Janika, this is Janika by the way, who thinks she's going to be able to stop Knuckles' death in the past, which is here, but really she just misunderstood instructions from her alternate reality mother, and this never had anything to do with the main plot and is only making things confusing to keep track of for no reason, and what is happening? But alright, the Dark Legion is accepted back into Echidna society. Fine. Maybe this will lead to some infighting, or maybe we'll go back to the dingoes. Actually, yeah, where are they? Or maybe Morituri Rex will be brought up again since he was there when the Legion blew up the floating island, but haha, just kidding. Nah, not gonna do any of that, because guess who's back? That's right, boys and girls, grab your trunks and your junk and scream it with me so Aurora above can hear ya. He's big, he's bad, he's back, he's Mammoth Mogul! Yep, Mammoth, Mother Trunkin' Mogul! At the most inopportune moment, this idiot shows up, puts his hand on a button and says, I'm gonna kill Dimitri if Knuckles doesn't get down here. And so Knuckles gets down there and Mogul tries to steal his chaos energy. Oh, well, we get obnoxious narration to try and make this sound cooler than it is. The echidna known as Knuckles. Stop. Please, I'm begging you. Just call him Knuckles. Using more words doesn't make it better, and that's coming from a guy who's talked about this comic for over 5 hours now. Just be good for once, you stupid comic, you stupid elephant. And then Knuckles dies. Yep, this is how Knuckles goes out. A joke of a character shows up and takes him away from us in the lamest way possible. So yeah, Knuckles is dead. How are we going to treat this? Well, we get a couple stories about Knuckles' friends dealing with their loss. Julie Sue and Mighty reminisce on their friendship with Knuckles and how they met. Meanwhile, her and Vector, who have always disliked each other, are finally able to connect on one thing. They're sad, grieving, lonely, and at least in this, they can understand each other. Seems like Mean Green's sudden death is being given room to breathe. Seems like we're going to treat it with weight and focus on the other characters' reactions to it. Their reactions. Sorry, I couldn't do it anymore. Of course we aren't gonna do that. Of course we aren't gonna treat this properly. Why would we? Because Locke isn't here. That's right. Locke, Knuckles' father, arguably the most important relationship he has in the comic. All we get to see from him is that he looks mildly upset when he tells the freedom fighters that his son is dead. There is nothing else. In fact, when Knuckles visits his own funeral as a ghost, he offhandedly mentions his dad who's just chilling in the background. Guess Locke's given up on caring about this storyline too. But this is even more ridiculous than it initially appears. What I mean is that yes, it's insane that we would ignore Locke's reaction. This is his son, right? But you gotta keep in mind that for Locke, this is way worse than just losing his kid, as hard as that is to believe. Because his son represents everything to him. His traditions, his world, the future, the past, because he believes his son will save everyone from certain doom. That's what his visions told him after all. But if his son is dead, if he's lost him, then what does that mean for his visions? What does that mean for all he sacrificed and lost in his entire character arc? Evidently, not enough to show us his thoughts. Anyway, yeah, Knuckles is dead now, and that means we're gonna have to get some recap about his time in the comic. Sweet, waste a little more of my time, why don't ya? Guess we finally get to meet Aurora, though. Hi. Oh, look, she's confirming that she sent Locke that vision. Good to know it really wasn't just a bad dream. And she's gonna let Knuckles go join the Chaos Force in the afterlife or something. Oh, but then he rejects it because he can sense his friends are in danger and he wants to go save them, so he gets a second chance at life and... Wait, this doesn't make any sense, right? If she thinks Knuckles dies here, if she wanted him to go to the afterlife, if he had to fight with her to come back to life, then what about the prophecy? What about the vision she gave Locke? Huh. Guess it was all just a lie. Now, it would be one thing if this moment felt purposeful, like if the vision was a lie and that was an actual reveal, but it's not. It's something I had to piece together after the fact based on what I think is an accident. After all, here we can see that Knuckles walks into the afterlife, but then Aether talks with Aurora, and my read on this conversation is that Knuckles is actually getting a second chance at life. She was just testing him or something. That would make some sense then. Again, the whole vision still needs to come true, or else she's just insane and needlessly cruel, I guess. Except in the next issue, she clearly wants Knuckles to stay dead. He has to argue with her and he loses his ability to ever go and be among his ancestors in the Chaos Force. Sounds important. Sounds like he's giving up something serious by going against the rules. So, yeah, even if it seems like a continuity error, the fact of the matter is that on the page, what's written is that Aurora is massively inconsistent and the prophecy doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter, then what did I just spend all my time reading? In the making of this retrospective, I've read the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic and its various spin-offs numerous times. The first time, of course, I read the Knuckles material alongside the Sonic stuff. and I didn't really enjoy a lot of this section of the comic, the way past insanest era as I called it previously. Originally, I thought that was because the humor didn't connect with me, or maybe I just wanted the comic to be a bit more serious again. Either way, while I started the era having a good time and could still appreciate a lot of these character moments for what they were, by the end, I was pretty exhausted. I wasn't sure why, to be honest, and I only got more confused when I reread that same era and walked away having way more fun and a consistently great time, thoroughly enjoying myself and the pure absurdity of it all. So I had to ask myself what had changed, and I read it once more to be sure, and yeah, I still enjoyed it. So what was so different now? The difference was that I now knew how I wanted to structure this retrospective, that Knuckles would have its own section. As such, my co-writer Ian Waffles and I carved out the Knuckles narrative, and upon rereading, we skipped them and read them on their own later. And it's only now, while writing this and talking about it with him, that I've realized that's what changed. I wasn't reading Knuckles. Just like with Sonic's World Adventure, Knuckles had ultimately destroyed the fun of this section of the comic for me. If I was analyzing this comic in the way it was actually meant to be consumed, in the way any regular person would consume it their first time through, then that Sonic comic that lost its mind section would have been far less kind. And that really sucks. Like, I hate that despite all its interesting ideas, despite the potential, despite how fun it can be to think about and discuss, at the end of the day, the Knuckles stuff is just disappointing and a wasted investment that dragged the rest of the comic down with it, at least for me. Where I could easily slip into the it doesn't matter mode for Sonic stuff, thus allowing myself to just be surprised with its comedy or genuinely heartfelt moments, I could never do that with Knuckles. Because I really felt like it wanted me to take it seriously, and so I tried to. I tried to get invested, and I was consistently punished for it. And sadly, outside of a few arcs, I can't say anything in Knuckles has in the end been worthwhile, especially when you consider how much it borks the rest of the comic's material. Like, sure, I enjoyed the Drug-Laced Chili Dog arc and some of the other sections here and there, but overall, I just can't say this was worth it. Because reading this honestly just feels like a massive waste of time. And it's not because the comic's stupid. It's not because it lacks ambition. It's because after all of this, it just lied to me. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't have a point. And for a story that spent so much time clearly trying to communicate a point to me, I just can't forgive that. Throughout everything I've discussed so far, one man has handled the writing for the vast majority of Knuckles' material, Ken Penders. Of course, I've already discussed him and his stories with this comic a number of times before now, but the last time we really dove into his contributions was Endgame. The reason? Well, according to Penders during my interview with him, he was offered the opportunity to become the head writer of the Sonic comic or the newly formed Knuckles spin-off, but he couldn't do both. As such, feeling that it would be more beneficial to his career to prove his abilities with a new series, instead of one that had already found success, he chose Knuckles. Along with that, he also just wanted the increased creative freedom this gave him, and boy, oh boy, did he use that creative freedom. However, throughout this retrospective series, my hope has been to look at why the comic turned out the way it did, especially in the moments where I complained so much. After all, there's been no shortage of people pointing and laughing at the material throughout the years, and so this felt like my own way of taking it seriously. I also wanted to give credit where credit was due. I mean, while I hated the direction Penders took Bunny and Antoine's relationship in during Endgame, he also wrote one of their best moments period with the Upgrade story, a genuinely heartfelt and lovely tale. Clearly, Penders is more than capable of writing both stories I enjoy and stories that I don't enjoy. So, what happened with Knuckles? Well, even before I talked with the man himself, there have been pretty clear hints of complications behind the scenes, or at least reasons behind some of the iffier issues in this era. Like, remember this one? The one with the real-life backgrounds? Well, Penders did everything here. Penciling, lettering, coloring, inking, writing, chief cook, and bottle washer. It was all him. Considering how tight comic book deadlines already are, that just seems like a recipe for an unfinished product. You know, things like those backgrounds. But this was still an assumption on my part, so I asked Penders about how working on the comic went behind the scenes, about the schedules, workload, and so on.
I would roll through like 4 in the morning, go to bed, get up about like 9 o'clock, and then start all over again. I can't even tell you how many times I would be racing to get a package off to the FedEx office, before midnight, so it could be in the Archie offices the next morning. I was really doing more than I care to think about at this point.
So yeah, regardless of the end result in some of these issues, it's clear as day that Penders was working, and I think it's also clear that sometimes he was stretched thin. Of course, none of this is me shaming people for giggling at some of the silly art. I've done plenty of that myself, but this context, it definitely helps me understand what on earth happened here. And this type of business may also, in part, be to blame for some of the Knuckles story's bigger problems, like the numerous dropped or forgotten plot points. I even asked Penders if he had time to read the other writer's material or collaborate consistently in that manner.
You gotta keep in mind, we had deadlines all the time. And so just meeting our deadlines, just trying to get our stories done, we really didn't have time to focus on what other people were doing. That was the editor's job, to keep everything flowing together.
So yeah, that might explain some weird moments. Like when Aurora is seemingly letting Knuckles go back to life, and then in the next issue, written by Carl Bollers instead of Penders, that has suddenly changed, resulting in her vision and past motivations becoming a jumbled mess of contradictions. And I'm not pointing fingers at Bollers here. No, my point is that things were so busy, there were so many people working on different elements of this comic, that even something as simple as knowing what was going on became a challenge. The left hand sometimes didn't know what the right hand was doing. And that's more of a systemic issue than something you can blame any one person for. Of course, though, most dropped plot points weren't the result of these potential miscommunications. No, at the end of the day, Penders was still handling most of this material. So what happened there? Why did we jump from idea to idea so rapidly? Why did so many things get tossed away or discarded? Why could the story get so darn anticlimactic?
It was always operating two schools of thought. One, how am I going to keep the book, moving along, advancing it, showing growth to the character? At the same time, I was always recognizing it could all come to an end just like that. The thing is, the entire time I worked for Archie, I never ever had the feeling of security that it's just going to go on. There was always seeds in the previous stories to use for successive stories. The question was, did I have an idea that would advance the seeds I had planted? If I didn't have an idea that would advance what had been laid before, then I was forced to come up with something else. What was going on during this time is I was doing conventions, and I was noticing that a lot of kids I was seeing, they were essentially product of broken homes. Their parents had gotten divorced. I had gone through a divorce myself. And so, I saw what my son was experiencing. So I felt that he needed something to relate as did these other kids. So that was my inspiration of having Knuckles come from a broken family. The fans were my biggest source of support. It was like, okay, they would ask for certain things. We would get questions about relationships. What's Julie Sue to the Knuckles and so on. And that resulted in the story about Knuckles and Julie Sue actually having their first date.
There we go. Now things are making sense. Like when I jumped from this arc to the romance arc before, I was kind of flabbergasted. Didn't it feel like we had been setting something else up? Wasn't this a strange time for a detour, even if I enjoyed the detour? Well, yeah, it was, but there was no guarantee the book would continue. In fact, it was canceled shortly after, so it seems that Penders at times made the choice to tackle what fans were more interested in while there was still a chance to. Beyond that, some of these more serious plot points that may at first seem to needlessly complicate stories that already had A, B, and C plots, stuff like Knuckles dealing with his mother remarrying, that was Penders' way of trying to reflect his readers' life experiences, to give them someone they could connect with, to make them feel seen. And I definitely can't knock the guy for that. However, this doesn't change the fact that overall, I wish the comic would have just acted like there was more time left. What I mean is that yes, it would suck for a story to be building towards something and then get canceled out of nowhere. But I'd take that over a story that feels random and anticlimactic because it's always operating under the fear of cancellation. It also doesn't excuse things like Mammoth Mogul swooping in twice to undermine seemingly interesting conflicts, or stuff like Moratory Rex disappearing. Yeah, remember him? The false Tobor guy. What happened there? Well, I asked Penders and he was completely candid.
I was trying to leave the door open because I wasn't sure if I was creating another dimension, if I was going to address the issue of death. I had questions myself. I just wasn't sure.
Here we see an avoidance of finality, a problem in the opposite direction of fearing cancellation. Because now there are also problems that arise from not knowing how much longer things will go on, how many seeds to plant. So sometimes characters and ideas just sort of get lost in the shuffle. Heck, even whole plot points were lost because of cancellation, like Knuckles 20 years later. That's probably where Locke's vision would have come true, as it's literally marketed that way in the issue itself, but nope. That's gone. So now that vision never comes to pass, and the entire feel and themes of the story feel irrevocably different and strange. The Knuckles 20 Years Later special in general is all kinds of fascinating production hell. For one, we actually have concept art for things advertised in the comic itself with these future designs for the characters drawn by Spaz that, as usual, make it feel like this story was gonna be freaking awesome. It was supposed to be in a Sonic Super Special, but that never came to fruition. Then it was pushed to a later Super Special issue, but the comic had gotten canceled by then along with the Knuckles comic, which apparently really killed a lot of Penders' passion for the project. Then there's the fact that the main villain for Knuckles 20 years later was actually set up in an earlier Super Special where Sonic crosses over with the Image Comics characters. Here we meet this guy who says he knows Knuckles even though Knuckles doesn't know him, for they have fought in the future. Whoa, that's right, that was the villain who was prophesized to end the world, and that Knuckles would use his mutant chaos powers to defeat some nameless guy. Except wait, he actually does have a name if you're able to search through the copyrighted characters section. Yeah, it's Dr. Ian Droid. Well, that's one mystery solved at least, I guess. So yeah, all this is to say that Penders is definitely to blame for a lot of the problems with his story, but I think it's worth it to consider the outside forces at play too. However, this isn't quite the end of Penders' work on this comic, as he had the opportunity to make one more big Knuckles story. See, regardless of what was intended to happen at the end of the Green Knuckles saga, the higher-ups demanded that Knuckles lose his chaos powers and, in Penders' words, reset him back to how he was when we met him in issue 13. Something Penders was completely against doing. That wasn't the story he wanted to tell. So what story did he want to tell? Or rather, what was he allowed to? Well, Mobius 25 years later, an arc that occurs from issue 131 through 144, mostly taking place in the B stories, a totally revamped future storyline for Knuckles, and an arc that's actually a lot of fun. First off, almost the entire thing is penciled by Steven Butler, with colors by Jason Jensen, so we're in great hands here. This is among the comic's best looking stories thus far, with great moody lighting and these fun, expressive, sensual, and cool character designs, especially Knuckles with his robot eye and hawking hat and cowboy boots, and yeah, I just really like the way he looks. The presentation stands out in other ways as well. For example, there's this one story where Sonic and his family are going to visit Knuckles' home. Both of them have had some issues during the 25 years we've missed, so they aren't exactly pumped to see each other. But there are important matters to discuss. So on the left half of the page, we see Sonic's day as his family travels to Angel Island. On the right, we get Knuckles' day as they prepare for Sonic to arrive. We get a meaningful snapshot of each of these characters' familial relationships, of Julie Sue questioning why Knuckles has seemed so worried recently and him eventually confiding in her that he's worried something bad is coming. Meanwhile, Sonic laments his duties as king to Sally, and there's this undertone of tension between them. A feeling that this is a conversation they've had many times before, and that Sonic's free spirit sometimes clashes with his rigid life as a king. The paneling adds to the feeling that these are parallel stories too, that these characters have truly grown apart and that them finally coming back together is a big deal. Because at the end of the story, the two separate sides of the page blend together as Sonic knocks on Knuckles' door. It's really clever, and the presentation does a ton of work in bolstering the story's characterization and this underlying tension there. Meanwhile, Penders is genuinely in his element here when writing these aged-up versions of Sonic and Knuckles who are able to naturally fall back into their past dynamic while also being old dudes who burp at the dinner table, yet have to deal with adult responsibilities like family and kids. The dialogue is really charming at times, all within a scenario that is intrinsically hilarious to me. Knuckles speaking like an old man or telling his daughter, "You know, there's another ancient echidna custom I think needs reviving. It's called a spanking." Wow, that's not something I expected to ever have come out of Knuckles' mouth, but I'm pretty dang happy it happened. Watching these game characters in these domestic and sometimes really private situations is a whirlwind of ridiculousness you'll only get in Archie, Sonic, and Knuckles, and I love it. Speaking of babies, though, these Sonic characters sure have been getting busy. That's right, they've fucked. There are so many kids here, and I love all of them. Not because every single one have all that much time devoted to them or these fleshed out personalities, but because this is just so insane to me. Like every time I look at Manic or Sonya, I think, Sonic and Sally, they made them. What? And just watching Sonic dunk on children while playing volleyball, come on, the old man's still got it. Then there's stuff like Vector worrying that his kid Argyle, who's apparently a bit shy, won't be able to bust a move on the dance floor, but look at him, he's grooving all right. Oh man, what a timeline we live in. Fortunately though, the family who really needs further development gets that too. Of course, that's Knuckles. His and Julie Sue's relationship is at its most real, with how they clearly support and love each other, but sometimes struggle with how they raise their daughter, Lara Sue. But unlike Locke with Lara Lane, Knuckles consistently communicates with Julie Sue, and listens when she asks him to connect with their daughter and tells him that he's the only one who will be able to reason with her. And so, he does. After all, Lara Sue has locked herself up because she doesn't want to go to her unveiling. this echidna ritual for 16-year-old girls. Instead, she wants to start training as a guardian like her father did. And what I love is that since this is the first issue of this story, we don't immediately resolve this conflict, and instead focus on a gentle way of handling the situation. As Knuckles rests his hand on the door and calmly says, "Larasu, I know you want to be a guardian, and I think you'd make a great guardian. It's just that I don't believe there's a need for one anymore, myself included. Not going to the unveiling tonight won't affect anything other than you missing out on an important event in your life. Larasu? All right, Dad. I'll go, as long as you promise me the first dance." I love that you can just tell how much Larasu felt like her dad really cared for her in this moment, and how Knuckles doesn't assert that she must go, but instead that in not doing so, she could be rejecting a really formative experience in her life that Knuckles clearly doesn't want her to miss out on. You know, like how he maybe missed out on some of his formative experiences he could have had. It might seem small at first, but this right here, it shows a massive commitment from Knuckles to do things differently with his family than what Locke did. When push comes to shove, he will open up, be vulnerable, and let Larasu just know his honest feelings. And that's what allows them to connect. The inherent emotional baggage Knuckles has from his own father, it makes this type of scene have a shocking amount of meaning and emotional depth. My rad red man's all grown up, and I actually am happy to see that. But beneath the many, many issues of family-based slice-of-life shenanigans, there is a storm brewing. See, all these times that Sonic traveled through dimensions in the past are finally coming back to haunt Mobius, as there's this further breakdown of sorts between zones occurring. Seemingly the only way to stop it is to send someone back in time to change the past. Of course, Sonic volunteers, but when Larasu sneaks her way into the vicinity of this time travel machine, she is also transported when something goes wrong. What I just described is a simple plot, but that's also where 25 years later ends. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to get here, and it becomes a pretty major problem by the time we reach said ending, as with more time comes more chances for the comic's usual quirks to rise to the surface. Like Sally and Julie Sue mostly just exposit things to us rather than getting all that much in the way of compelling character focus. Stephen Butler turns a cheesy but likable mother-daughter moment into cleavage time. Knuckles is still willing to spy on people somewhat like the Brotherhood did, and we don't explore any potential issues with that. So once again, it feels like some things are just happening without proper consideration being given to them. But then there's the most obvious and biggest problem. After all the meandering we've discussed so far, the Knuckles storyline chose to leave us on a cliffhanger rather than give closure. Well, all except for one story. See, in issue 143, Penders writes and draws for his second to last Knuckles story, Father's Day. We begin with Knuckles thinking back to the past, where he says goodbye to Archimedes, who is finally returning home. Even though these two haven't really had any great material for a while now, this moment of finality between them, it still somehow hits. The goodbye from Archie combined with him saying, "I couldn't be any prouder if you were my own son. You've grown up." And then Knuckles looks out at the blank space where Archie, his friend and mentor, just stood, wondering if he'll ever see him again. For a comic that's floundered so much, this is strangely final. But when Knuckles returns home that day, he learns that it might be time for another goodbye. Because Locke is really sick, he's even unconscious, and in that state, he can't decide for himself whether the doctor should perform an exploratory surgery to find the cause, or leave him be. So Knuckles is left to make the call for his father. He tells the doctor to do the surgery, and the art genuinely conveys how much this weighs on him. Soon the doctor gives Knuckles the news he didn't want to hear. His father is dying, there's nothing more they can do. At best, he has maybe 9 months to live. For Knuckles, this all comes out of nowhere. He didn't know his dad was feeling ill. Just like so many other things in his father's life, this was kept from him. Then there's the fact that they don't even really get to know what caused this illness. There's just so much uncertainty surrounding this. But the doctor walks away, and Knuckles looks distraught. But Locke awakens, and though Lara says she'll leave Knuckles with his father so they can be alone, Locke asks that they both stay. "I want to be with my family." Even if Lara found someone else, he's always loved her and he always will. He needs to tell her that, but he doesn't blame her for what she did, no. He says, "I was the one who walked away from what should have been." They try to tell Locke that all of this, voicing these regrets and apologies, that it isn't necessary, but Locke needs to do this. After so much time being closed off from them, he needs to connect. He needs them to know him and see him, and he needs them to realize that he's sorry. Your great-grandfather Aether told me to have faith, that Aurora would show me the way, that everything happens for a reason. I'll never forgive myself for placing the mantle of guardian on you so young. I should have given you a choice. Knuckles assures him that he doesn't resent him, but
This isn't about Knuckles' resentment. This is about Locke's. His resentment of himself and of the things he did. I listened to a voice, followed the teachings of those before me that all said you were meant to break the cycle, your destiny greater than any who came before you. I thought that mattered above all else, but I know now that was wrong. What truly does matter is that you're my son and that I love you. Very soon after, Locke dies, only having realized what mattered to him far too late into his life. He'll never run around with his boy again. He'll never get to see him grow up. He won't get to see his grandchildren. All he can do now is say, I'm sorry, knowing that it's not enough. That nightmare all those years ago and the people who told him that it was true, they've taken so much from him. Just like with Knuckles, just like with so many guardians before him in the string of hypocrisies and traumatic rites of passage, Locke is a victim. But no, he can't rest all the blame on their shoulders. It wasn't them, it was him. It was Locke. And in a startling moment of clarity, he rejects those teachings, the traditions, the faith, the past, all of it. Because at the end of his life, he can't see those things. He can only see his son. His son who still loves him. His son who he still loves. His son who he failed.
Thing was, the last months of my father's life, that was essentially, I was coming to terms with my relationship with him, because we hadn't had what I would call the best of relationships. Fathers and sons back then, especially, the relationships were not what they are now. You didn't see dads as involved with their kids' lives. Basically, dad went to work, mom was home with the kids, for the most part. If you saw dad, it was like you did something wrong and he has to lay down the law to you. So, when my father was dying from cancer, I spent every day of his last 3 months of his life with him in the hospital. When it came time to do that story, I said, yeah, I have to be totally honest how this is going to be handled. And that's why I see the dedication to my father at the end. I myself was in tears when I worked on that story. I really had a very emotional time putting that thing together.
How am I supposed to take this? How am I supposed to feel about a story that, intentionally or not, has just disavowed everything it set out to do? A story that realizes in its final breath that all the time spent on lore, drama, and inconsequential plot lines, that all of it was simply distracting from the character whose name was on the cover. Because we can all see it at this point, right? This was never Knuckles' comic. This was never his story. It was Locke's, the broken and dying heart of this tale. And he's sorry for wasting that time. The comic is sorry. I think I, and everyone who's read this, sat through issue after issue, has the right to be pretty ticked off about that. I stand by every criticism I've had about the Knuckles the Echidna comic. But personally, I can't be angry here. I've been angry already. Despite everything, I can never be upset reading this story, because even with all the baggage, my heart can't help but feel every single word. I was so determined not to repeat your actions that I found other ways to do them instead. Just like you gave me no choice in becoming a guardian, I was set on preventing your granddaughter from going through what I did. And that's just as wrong too. So I'm gonna give her the choice you didn't give me, the choice you weren't given either, Dad. It only took until now for me to realize it as well. I only wish you were here for me to share it with. And so Knuckles makes this change. Even if it scares him to give up control, Lara Sue will be the next guardian, because it isn't a father's job to control their child. It's their job to guide them in becoming the best version of themselves that they can be. And just like that, Penders' work with Knuckles is over. And what an emotional end it is. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video and possibly to the end of my other Archie Sonic videos as well if you made it this far. I really appreciate it and I hope you're still enjoying them. I just wanted to take a moment to mention here that the next part of this retrospective won't be out for a while. It's going to be a really big one. I'm going to need to take a lot of time putting it together, and I also just want to cover a couple other topics in the meantime so that my channel isn't entirely taken over by Archie Sonic. On top of that, I've also received some messages or comments from people who are curious of where
they could start reading the comic or where is the best place to do that. Obviously, you could start from the beginning using Ian Waffles' reading guide, which is linked in the description. But if you aren't interested in that for any reason, I actually think issue 130 is a really great place to start, and that's where the next video is going to be picking up. After all, at that point, Sonic is getting back from space, and a time skip has occurred. So as Sonic is refamiliarizing himself with Mobius, you too can sort of use that as an introduction to the world, and it will feel a little more natural than just plopping in at some other random point. Beyond that, I also just wanted to make mention of my patrons whose names are scrolling on by. I really appreciate all of them, and if you are interested in supporting these videos and supporting the channel in any other way, that is a great way to do that over on Patreon. These videos, they obviously take a lot of time. I did it to myself. I chose this life, and I enjoy it, but, you know, if you do want to support the channel, yeah, it's there in the description. Either way, though, thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye, and see you next time.